We've been using our Ooni Koda 16 outdoor pizza oven since November of 2022, and we've been experimenting making a variety of different kinds of pizzas and even breads, but the dough we use is pretty much the same recipe that we started with. I'm sharing our simple dough recipe with you today. Now, the original recipe we found on the internet listed the ingredients in grams, so that's how I do it, and I first set the kitchen scale to grams. I'll put a link in the description to the original recipe that we found, but both my husband and I have since modified it to our own versions based on our tastes. This recipe makes 5 dough balls, and I use 802 grams of all-purpose flour. We've tried different brands and really don't have a favorite, so we just buy what's on sale. Our recipe calls for 4 grams of instant yeast, 23 grams of salt, 29 grams of sugar, and 515 grams of water. Before last November, I had never tried making any kind of bread or pizza dough from scratch, and I was really surprised at how easy it is. I mix all of the dry ingredients together. Next, I mix in the water. I forgot, I usually use this blue silicone scraper to mix the water in with the flour because the dough gets pretty sticky at this point, but it won't stick to the scraper. I almost always need to add a little more water because there is usually loose, dry flour kicking around the bottom of the bowl. But before I add more water, I add the last ingredient for the dough, which is 1 1/4 tablespoons of olive oil. Once I've mixed the olive oil in well, I'll add a little bit of water at a time to make sure there isn't any dry flour left behind. Once I've mixed the olive oil in well, I'll add a little bit of water at a time to make sure there isn't any dry flour left behind. Then I take the dough out of the bowl and work it for a few minutes on the silicone mat. I use a little bit of olive oil on my hands so that the dough doesn't stick to my fingers too much. Because we make dough often, we will put the finished dough balls into oiled glass or plastic bowls right into the fridge without letting them rise at all. When we first started making pizzas, we read articles and watched other YouTube videos about how long to proof dough and how many hours it needs and the right and wrong temperatures, etc. But we found that this dough is very forgiving. If we wanted to make a pizza today, we could just leave one of these dough balls out for a couple of hours and make a pretty okay pizza, although the worst thing about fresh dough is that it's really hard to stretch. All of our pizzas, breads, and the 2 calzones that we've made so far all tasted really good. So for us, we don't subscribe to any hard and fast rules about dough prep except for one, and that is we don't use aluminum pans to proof the dough. This probably sounds strange, but I can tell which pizza places proof their dough on aluminum pans because those pizzas give me terrible pancreatitis attacks from all of the aluminum that ends up in the pizza dough. And that's pretty much it. The first time I made this recipe, I made sure to weigh the finished dough so that I had a good idea of the weight that each of the 5 dough balls needed to be. Now I just eyeball it. Anyway, keeping the dough in the fridge before rising makes the yeast work much more slowly and the dough doesn't puff up much until day 2. After the second day, the dough keeps getting softer, and if it has a higher quantity of water in it, it can get really gooey when you're trying to stretch it out, and we will cook really old doughs in the cast iron skillet as deep dish pizzas. We had intended to make some pizzas with this dough in a couple of days, but with a trip to Disney and a rainy day when we got back home, we didn't get to it until 4 days later. Since we tend to make drier doughs nowadays, this dough was still okay for making thin crust pizzas. I'll write out this simple pizza and bread recipe in the description of this video. Thank you for watching, and give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful, and subscribe to our channel to find more Paradise Today.